This is an interesting paper that just came out. It has a kind of a new approach. It looks at sustained cost declines in solar PV and battery storage needed to eliminate coal generation in India. So we know that coal has to be weaned out of the system, or the system has to wean itself of coal as soon as possible for meeting the net zero goals and externalities like health, because coal is horrendously bad for human health, air quality, and so on. And instead of trying to see how fast renewables can grow, there is the other aspect of looking at how the cost of solar PV and battery storage can grow to meet the estimated demand, so that coal generation can be eliminated. India is right now planning to have coal be part of the system, maybe even the biggest part of the system, for at least a decade, maybe two. So this is not good news, despite its promises, NDCs, and its own plans for life that's friendly for the environment and so on. Let's just read the abstract. Unabated coal power in India must be phased out by mid-century to achieve global climate targets under the Paris Agreement. Here we estimate the costs of hybrid power plants, lithium-ion battery storage with wind and solar PV to replace coal generation. We design least cost mixes of these technologies to supply stylized base load and load following generation profiles in 3 Indian states, Karnataka, Gujarat, and Tamil Nadu. Our analysis shows that availability of low cost capital, solar PV capital costs of at least $250 per kilowatt, and battery storage capacity costs at least 50% cheaper than current levels will be required to phase out existing coal power plants. Phase out by 2040 requires a 6% annual decline in the levelized cost of hybrid systems over the next 2 decades. We find that replacing coal generation with hybrid systems 99% of the hours over multiple decades is roughly 40% cheaper than 100% replacement, indicating a key role for other low-cost grid flexibility mechanisms to help hasten coal phase-out. So there are some optimizations involved in terms of going 100% coal-free versus 99%, and then having flexibility in the grid to meet peak demands and base loads and so on. Solar PV is more suited to pairing with short duration storage than wind power. Just turns out the way things work out, given the wind potential, is that solar PV and short duration storage is more optimal. Overall, our results describe the challenging technological and policy advances needed to achieve the temperature goals of the Paris Agreement. Okay, the paper relies on atmospheric reanalysis products to estimate historic solar and wind energy, and it does some estimates of coal power production diurnal cycle, and it has to then combine all that with economic models as well as capacity factors to match reality in terms of average capacity factor for wind and solar at our selected site locations in Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, and Gujarat. Basically, capacity factor is what is being actually produced versus what is theoretically possible from that particular power plant. So wind and solar for each site, you can see that there are 22 and 19, 19 and 20, 23 and 20. So it depends on the state and depends on the resources available in terms of wind and solar to achieve those capacity factors. So here the target output profile in megawatts, 100%, 100 megawatts hour of day is considered flat. So this is a simulated target generation as inflexible baseload operating at 100 megawatts every hour of the year, which is not completely realistic because coal plants are not really on all the time. This is the average 24-hour period of simulated flexible target generation of coal power plants in the 3 states, and the details are provided in their supplementary information, but you get the idea that basically during the day when you have solar, the coal power production can drop, and it has to supply the base load at night times. So you're combining solar and wind to achieve the total supply needed, estimated, modeled, whatever you want to call it. So this figure basically shows the levelized cost of energy or electricity for least cost hybrid systems in Karnataka, Tamil Nadu and Gujarat for different assumptions around weighted average cost of capital. So there are various assumptions. It's also converted into cents using the exchange rate of $1 to 70 rupees, and essentially you are looking at cost of capital weighted average at 2.55 and 10% for Karnataka, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, with a mix of solar and wind. So here it is basically solar wind that is shown on the vertical axis. Okay, so for each, the dashed black line here represents the marginal cost of coal power plants in operating in those states today. So to make coal, to eliminate coal production, you have to somehow make sure the cost of the hybrid generation meets the needs confidently, so that coal can be left in the ground. Okay, so with respect to cost in kilowatt per kilowatt hour in rupees for various capital costs, you can see as capital cost goes up, obviously the cost of electricity goes up. It's done in rupees and cents, as I said, and this is for flexible generation. This is baseload generation, and this is flexible generation, as we saw here. Okay, you can see that in Karnataka the solar dominates, and in Gujarat there is a reasonable mix of solar and wind. So this is solar in the wind solar mix, so relative to wind, and in Tamil Nadu again wind dominates. They look almost the same. In the flexible generation the story is similar, and you can see the costs associated with them. So how do you find the optimum? You look at the levelized cost of electricity indexed. So this figure shows LCOE for different shares of solar PV in hybrid systems providing baseload generation. LCOE values on the y-axis are indexed to the LCOE for a hybrid system with only wind power and battery storage. So you are trying to see what percentage of solar is going to give you the optimum LCOE. And then you look at results for Karnataka. The optimal mix shown with red dot has 99% solar PV and 1% wind capacity, which is consistent with this figure that we looked at. In Gujarat, this is optimal mix with 75% solar PV and 25% wind capacity, and for Tamil Nadu the red dot has 93% solar PV and 7% wind capacity. So this is a nice way of trying to see what can we do in terms of deploying renewables into generating a hybrid grid with storage to deal with dispatchability or meeting peak demands, so that, or base loads, so that you can optimize the costs and basically reach a point where you can eliminate coal generation by the mid-century or before. So the time period where it gets done is not necessarily looked at here, but costs and economics of the need to reduce solar PV and battery storage costs is looked at. This is the LCOE assuming a 2.5% cost of capital for different levels of system availability, which is defined as the share of hours over 20 years where the hybrid plant provides the required 100 megawatt baseload generation. Karnataka, Gujarat and Tamil Nadu, the dashed horizontal line again is the marginal cost of coal power plants operating in those states today. So you can see that with cost per kilowatt hour, availability goes from 100% solar and down to 80%. You have a good mix of solar and wind. And similarly for Gujarat, as we saw before, wind is quite a good contributor, not just solar as in Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. And as you go further down, the fraction of solar drops, and you get a mix of 25% wind and rest in solar. So you just have to be careful that there are uncertainties and limitations in this approach, but it doesn't matter because this gives you storylines to look at in terms of reducing costs of renewables and storage to bring the costs down below the operating cost of coal so that you can eliminate coal generation. These are just details of Gujarat, which I'm not going to go into. It's looking at different sites in Gujarat versus the state average for wind, solar and battery and so on to produce levelized cost of electricity. But let's look at this one where you're looking at share of existing coal capacity and already past typical lifespan of the coal plants, retirement timeline for coal power plants across the 3 states, assuming a natural 40-year plant lifetime. So you have privately owned plants which are newer and will need to be phased out later in this century, whereas central government owned ones and state government owned ones many are already beyond their lifetime here. So the red line is measured on the y-axis on the left and plots the cumulative share of total capacity that is beyond its typical lifetime. The stacked bars are measured on the secondary y-axis here in megawatts on the right and plot the amount of coal capacity based on ownership that is scheduled to retire in each year. Total operational coal capacity across the 3 states is 39,000 megawatts. So basically you have to reach 100% of replacement for existing coal capacity at a reasonable time so that whatever remains after that is something that has to be phased out based on how the other renewables have been deployed. India's plans NDCs include generating 50% of the electricity by 2030 from renewables or non-fossil sources, which include biomass as well. Finally, this is just a matrix for each state, Karnataka, Gujarat and Tamil Nadu, looking at battery capacity, battery storage capacity costs. $200 per kilowatt hour, $150 per kilowatt hour, $100 per kilowatt hour, and $75 per kilowatt hour. So as storage cost goes down and as the solar PV capital cost goes down, you get into cheaper than existing coal with pollution controls. So you can look at the costs in these colors as cheaper than existing coal in this color, cheaper than existing coal with pollution controls in terms of rupees per kilowatt hour. You can see the costs here. Cheaper than new coal, so that's a bit higher, but that's still cheaper than new coal. Cheaper than existing coal with $20 per ton of carbon tax, so that price is higher. So if you run coal and you don't account for externalities like air quality, pollution control, health issues, then obviously you need to cover that by maybe having a carbon tax, which is what this is trying to do. Then if you have a range of storage and solar PV capital costs that are in this range, then it is still cheaper than existing coal, but you would need to have $50 per ton of carbon tax. And you go in these ranges, these colors you can see here for Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, but Gujarat doesn't have this problem. The cost will be at 6.3 to 7.2 rupees per kilowatt hour, which is cheaper than new coal with $50 per ton of carbon tax. So it's all relative to what coal would cost if you have to implement this hybrid energy system with solar PV and battery storage. Finally, the red color here for Tamil Nadu in the phase space is cheaper than new coal with $60 per ton of carbon tax. So this is a nice way of justifying how reducing the cost of solar PV and battery storage will get us into ranges which are clearly cheaper than coal, especially when also including the external costs of health, pollution, and so on. And this can be used at least as a guide for stylized future planning of driving implementation of renewables, but also driving towards reducing the cost of solar PV and battery storage, so that we can move towards actually keeping the coal in the ground and not mining it at all. Okay, let's leave it there.